They sent this secret gun against 200 Panzers, and the Germans called it impossible. On the morning of July 5, 1943, on the rolling wheat fields south of Olkhovatka, near the northern shoulder of the Kursk salient, a thin line of Soviet gunners waited in silence. Ahead of them lay open ground stretching nearly a kilometer. Behind them, hastily camouflaged in shallow earthworks, stood a weapon most of the world had never seen in combat. It was officially designated the 76.2mm divisional gun M1942, known to its crews simply as the ZIS-3. To German intelligence, it barely existed. To the men who would fire it that day, it was all that stood between survival and annihilation. Facing them were elements of General Walter Model's 9th Army, including armored formations from XLV III Panzer Corps. Nearly 200 German tanks and assault guns were assembling beyond the tree line. Panzer IIIs, Panzer IVs, StuG 3s, and the newly deployed Panther AUSF-D. The order given to the Soviet gun crews was brutally simple: hold the line at all costs. Little did they know that what happened next would become legendary. By the summer of 1943, the Eastern Front had reached a breaking point. After the catastrophe at Stalingrad, the Wehrmacht sought to regain the initiative. The result was Operation Citadel, a massive two-pronged offensive aimed at crushing the Soviet bulge around Kursk and restoring German momentum in the east. The Soviets knew it was coming. Months of intelligence, partisan reports, and aerial reconnaissance had revealed the buildup. Instead of attacking first, the Red Army chose to wait, constructing the deepest defensive system ever seen in modern warfare. Across the Kursk salients, the Soviets dug 8 successive defensive belts, laced with minefields, trenches, anti-tank ditches, and artillery strongpoints. At the heart of many of these positions stood a new gun, simple, cheap, and devastatingly effective. The ZIS-3 was the brainchild of Vasily Grabin, a brilliant but controversial Soviet weapons designer. Developed in near secrecy in late 1941, the gun combined the barrel of the older F-22 with a lightweight carriage and an efficient muzzle brake. The result was a weapon that could be produced quickly, moved by hand, and fired rapidly, up to 25 rounds per minute in trained hands. Officially, it was not supposed to exist. The Soviet Artillery Directorate initially rejected the design. Grabin built it anyway. By the time Moscow realized what he had done, thousands were already rolling off the production lines. By July 1943, over 10,000 ZIS-3 guns were in service. At Kursk, they would face their ultimate test. The sector near Olkhovatka was held by elements of the 13th Army, reinforced by anti-tank brigades drawn from the Central Front. Many of the gunners were young, some barely 20 years old. Others were veterans of Moscow and Stalingrad. All of them understood one thing clearly: if the German armor broke through here, the road to Kursk lay open. Fear gripped the men, but so did resolve. At 4:30 a.m., the silence shattered. German artillery opened fire along the entire northern face of the salient. High explosive shells tore into forward trenches. The earth shook, dust and smoke rolled across the fields. By 0600 hours, Soviet observers reported massed armor forming up behind the German lines. Engines roared to life, antennas bristled above turret roofs. Officers checked watches and maps one final time. At the ZIS-3 positions, gun commanders crawled from pit to pit, checking camouflage nets, sight alignment, and ammunition stacks. Armor-piercing rounds were placed closest at hand. Each gun had fewer than 120 shells. Once they were gone, the crew would fight with rifles and grenades. By 0800 hours, the first German tanks appeared. Dark silhouettes emerged through the smoke, advancing in staggered lines. Infantry rode on the halls. Half-tracks followed behind. The order came down the line: do not fire until 600 meters. The waiting was agony. Sweat ran into eyes. Hands tightened around elevation wheels. Every man knew that firing too early would reveal their positions and invite annihilation from German counter-battery fire. At 0900, the Germans accelerated. The distance closed rapidly. 100 tanks, then more. Dust clouds rose behind them, blotting out the horizon. By 1000 hours, nearly 200 armored vehicles were advancing into the Soviet kill zone. German commanders were confident. Reconnaissance suggested only light anti-tank defenses ahead. Prisoners had spoken of outdated guns and undertrained crews. The attack was expected to punch through within hours. What they didn't know was that the ZIS-3 crews had spent weeks rehearsing this exact moment. Range markers were pre-measured.
fields of fire overlapped. Each gun had assigned targets and fallback positions. At 600 meters, the first Soviet gun fired, then another, then the entire line erupted. The battlefield became a furnace. The sharp crack of ZIS-3 muzzle blasts echoed across the plain. Armor-piercing rounds slammed into advancing panzers, punching through side armor and turret rings. Tanks slewed to a halt, hatches bursting open as crews bailed out or burned inside. German return fire was immediate and ferocious. 75mm shells exploded among the gun pits. Shrapnel scythed through the air. Entire crews vanished in bursts of flame and soil. By 15:30 p.m., the Germans had identified several firing positions. Stuka dive bombers screamed down from the clouds, sirens wailing. Bombs detonated along the Soviet line, collapsing trenches and flipping guns onto their sides. Yet the fire did not stop. Gun crews dragged damaged ZIS-3s back into position by hand. Wounded men refused evacuation. One loader, his arm shattered, continued feeding shells with his remaining hand until he collapsed. At 5:00 p.m., the German Panthers entered the fight. Their sloped frontal armor proved resistant to standard Soviet rounds at long range. Shots ricocheted harmlessly. Panic spread along parts of the line. Then the order came down: aim for the tracks, close the range. ZIS-3 crews waited until the tanks were 300 meters away. At that distance, the gun's penetration improved dramatically. Track hits immobilized Panthers, turning them into stationary targets. Follow-up shots struck side armor at point-blank range. Still, losses mounted. Ammunition ran dangerously low. Entire batteries were wiped out.
Smoke and dust reduced visibility to a few dozen meters. For 3 brutal hours, the line bent but did not break. By 1900 hours, Soviet commanders faced a terrible truth. If the Germans renewed their assault at full strength, the sector would collapse. Everything seemed lost. As dusk approached, a decision was made that would define the battle. Surviving ZIS-3 crews were ordered to abandon fixed positions and adopt mobile ambush tactics. Guns were hitched to trucks or manhandled into new firing points under cover of smoke. German commanders, believing Soviet resistance shattered, pushed forward aggressively. Tanks advanced without infantry screens. Formations loosened. At 21:30 hours, the trap was sprung. From concealed positions barely 200 yards away, ZIS-3 guns opened fire into the flanks and rear of the advancing armor. The effect was catastrophic. Tanks erupted in flames. Command vehicles were destroyed. German formations dissolved into chaos. One battery, commanded by Senior Lieutenant Alexander Romanenko, knocked out 17 tanks in under 20 minutes before being overrun. Romanenko continued firing until his gun was destroyed, then led his surviving men in a counterattack with submachine guns. He was killed in action, but his stand halted an entire battalion. By 2300 hours, German radio traffic revealed mounting confusion. Reports spoke of unknown guns, impossible resistance, and unacceptable losses. The Ninth Army halted the assault. Against impossible odds, the line had held. When dawn broke on July 6th, the battlefield told the story. Over 70 German armored vehicles lay destroyed or abandoned in the sector near Olkhovatka. Soviet losses were staggering. Entire gun crews wiped out, positions reduced to craters. Yet the breakthrough had failed. The German offensive in the north stalled, never to recover its momentum. Within days, Operation Citadel was called off. The strategic initiative on the Eastern Front passed permanently to the Red Army. The ZIS-3 proved itself beyond all doubt. Cheap, reliable, and deadly, it became the most produced artillery piece of the war, with over 103,000 units built. German reports after Kursk specifically referenced the gun's effectiveness, calling Soviet anti-tank fire unexpectedly concentrated and lethally accurate. Several gunners were posthumously awarded the Hero of the Soviet Union. Others received the Order of the Red Banner. Many were never named. Their guns remained where they fell, silent witnesses to the cost of holding the line. The human cost was immense. Fear, sacrifice, and loss etched into the soil of Kursk. But so was the triumph of determination over despair.
They sent a secret gun against 200 Panzers, and the Germans called it impossible. Yet history proved otherwise. This was just one of countless untold stories from the Second World War. Subscribe to Past Horizon as we continue to bring these forgotten chapters of history back to life.